Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the September 11th, 2018 Radnor Township School District Board Curriculum Committee meeting of the whole board. And before we go into our agenda items, I'd like to welcome our new student rep who is joining us up here, Asa Hartman. Thank you so much for stepping forward and taking the risk to learn something new. So we appreciate that. And we also want to welcome back our teacher rep. We really appreciate your efforts, Mrs. McMiniman from the middle school. And everybody else is the usual faces, well, of the board. The curriculum committee members are Sarah, Mr. Madden, and Ms. Bonenberger, and myself. And then the other board members have joined us because we're going to be discussing some items of relevance to the whole district. All right, and with all of that, let's go into our first agenda item. Dr. McQuiggan?
Thank you very much. Tonight we are very excited to have several of our middle school teachers with us who are going to be talking to us about the middle school program evaluation. Specifically tonight we're going to be focusing on goals and action items that they actually have already begun to put in place. So some of these things are already up and running, but they're also going to be giving you a peek into the next 3 years to let you know the direction that the study has pointed the school in. We're also going to talk about the district goals and take a look at those, and then I have some board action items for you as well, and we'll do those at the beginning of the agenda. We have a very ambitious agenda again next month, so we may be playing around with this a little bit, but we want to come back to you with some information about technology K-12. We spent a lot of time talking to you about high school technology. We've done a lot of work over the summer with the K-12 Committee of Teachers to map those expectations all the way back to kindergarten, so we have quite a bit of updated information to share. We have a writing initiative in place this year, and Dr. Kearney is going to be coming next month to give you a little update on that professional development that's already in place. Social studies was in audit last year, and we want to give you a report on that. And then Dr. Kent is working on our calendar committee. I know we've been talking here and there about the school calendar and things that we might want to look at and we might want to change. And we have a process in place to systematically do that this year. So Dr. Kent will be talking to us and giving us a little preview about that in October. Just a few updates for you in your packets this month. I gave you a report on summer programming. As you know, we run 5 different programs over the summer. We ran our summer reading program again, and that is for students who are reading below grade level at the conclusion of the year, so we had a nice turnout for that. We do always run under Title III our English Language Learner program for any student in the district who's part of our English Language Learner program. Extended school year, we've done a lot of work over the past few years to expand this and try to meet the needs of as many of our special education students as we can in the summer. So we had a nice large group of 84 in ESY. We ran our math program again, and I gave you some reports on the number of students who registered for each course. And then Dr. Murray ran the STEAM in the summer camp, and that, as you know from last year, filled up very quickly, and they had a robust 124 students. So that was just to give you a little update on how those things are panning out. We have Family Involvement Night coming on November 8th at Radnor Middle School, and you'll be getting more information about that from Dr. Rabarczyk. And then this year, you can look forward to hearing more about the English Language Learner program, which is going to be in the audit phase, and also K-12 library. Library has just come out with some new standards, so the timing is great. And last year, many of the state and federal regulations around English language learners changed, so this is a great time for us to be looking at those 2 things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That brings us to the second item on our agenda, which is public comment. The public is welcomed to please come and participate and offer their comments, and per board policy to please try to limit their comments to only 4 minutes as we have a packed agenda. Is there any public comment?
Good evening. My name is Stacy Mandel. Do I say my address or no? Okay.
Just you could say.
Thank you for the opportunity to take a couple minutes of your time. I'm just here because I know that the student wellness policy is about to be updated, and I understand that there is a component for social, emotional, and mental wellness in that, and so that's wonderful. And I wanted to just gently remind you that I am an advocate for mindfulness, and I do think that that is an evidence-based component of social emotional well-being that I think would be relevant towards, that would fit in well with the district wellness policy, particularly as you talked about goals. Dr. McQuiggan, are on the table, the 2017-18 goals. I know that one of them was for challenging and meeting the needs of all students, and there was language in there mentioned about students not just being a number on a test and meeting the needs of the whole student and going deeper, as deeper as we could go as a district to meet the needs of students. And I think that, in particular, mindfulness supports that, helps us go deeper and helps us not just look at students as a number in a variety of ways. So I just wanted to say that I'm still interested in trying to help us, just examine it, just explore it, be open to it, and perhaps maybe meet about it and discuss it further and see where that road takes us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mandel.
Hello again, Judy Sherry, Governor Circle. I guess my questions from the last meeting I don't have answers to, so I'll repeat some of them. Why did football start on August the 6th when RTSD website stated that fall sports start on August 13th? August 6th is a whole month before the academic part of the school year starts, and it kind of sends a message to people that we value this particular sport above the academics. Will football coaches come to a school board meeting and demonstrate the so-called safe tackling techniques middle school students have to learn so that they can tackle safely at the high school? And this could be in a video or an in-person demonstration. Will you eliminate heading in soccer in middle school? Is the district considering offering Mandarin in a different format? Is purposeful playtime measured, and how is it evaluated? And I brought up the question about whether teachers were concerned about Amplify Science. I know you're going to be looking at that today as part of the middle school program review. And I'd like to hear what recommendations the administration and the board will have moving forward regarding Amplify Science. I have a slight correction in the minutes regarding my comments about Garnet Valley's curriculum initiative for the next 5 years. That initiative was to offer classes 3 different ways: in person, online, or a combination of the two. And I didn't say that we should necessarily follow that example. I said, or if I did, excuse me, but what I intended to ask for was that we take a look at the results that they have moving in this direction and then make the determination about whether it would be a good idea for Radnor. Under board action items 4.3, approval of overnight trips. What's the cost or value of a van to and from an event and a bus to and from an event? That's not listed. And why are some expenses listed as district estimated costs and some are district estimated contributions? What's the difference between those two topics? And finally, I know that clearly there was a lot of work that went into this review report, but when you read the report, it's sometimes very difficult to find out whether or not something is recommended or not recommended, because you end up reading about both sides of the issue. So that, for instance, with integrated classes, you hear lots of very good things, but then you also hear some negative things. And I guess the question I have is it possible to show that there's a relationship, that maybe 90% were positive comments and these other comments were only a very small minority of the either the parents or the teachers or the students that were participating? Because it's very hard to determine, when you get through, what action should be taken. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment at this time?
Good afternoon, Cindy Spurtle, Wayne. A couple questions, a follow-up question to the minutes from the August meeting, and that was on the cost comparison, cost allocated to the FDK, to the full-day kindergarten. There was a review and a presentation on how the students have done in testing through the third grade, but nothing was mentioned on additional costs that were incurred going from half-day to full-day, and I think that should be covered. It's very important to a lot of people. A question I've covered in the past, I'll bring it up again since it was mentioned in the summer programming review of this past summer, and that's the STEAM summer camp. And my question is as to why the A in STEAM is dropped so it turns into just STEM when we get into the academic year. In other words, the art part of STEAM is eliminated. And I've asked for the last couple of years, and an explanation would be good at this point in time. On priority projects that are summarized in district goals for 18-19, the number one in priority project is adolescent sleep and start time, and I'm wondering if there's a target date or a goal as to when that report will be presented. It's been going on for quite some time. And if there's some sort of a date when we can expect the results of that study, that would be good, since it seems to be brought up at almost every other business meeting by one or two of the parents. A lot of very interesting reports that were presented. Just a quick question on the agenda item, 4.3 curriculum committee meeting, different approvals for overnight trips. And there are the cost value. There are a couple items that are listed, like in a van to and from an event. There has to be some cost associated with that. Or van or a bus are listed, but no costs. And some are listed as contributions to different events, and others are costs. Does that mean that a contribution is no cost to the school district? Is that the difference for that? And then the very interesting study was the review, the external observational data that you gave us from the Chester County Intermediate Unit that was here to study. And in the baseline data information showed that as a result of the observational data, that Radnor earned an average score of 2.33 out of 5 for rigor and in the area of standards alignment. I noticed that there's going to be quite a bit of presentation or more studying being done on that, but the concern is that's below 50%, not a very great grade level for Radnor Middle School, Radnor School District, period. So I will be very interested to hear the answer to that, especially since many of the comments in the rigor section presented in the large report by students were more on a negative side than a positive side. And I admire you all for including that in the report, but I still feel that it's a concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spurtle. Is there any other public comment at this time? Seeing none, that brings us to the approval of the minutes from the August 14th meeting. I'm unclear what Ms. Sherry actually said in August, but I will take her word that she meant to express that we should review I guess it's the Great Valley.
Right.
Garnet Valley.
Garnet Valley article. So do you want to?
So moved. Do you want a motion for that?
Do we need a motion to do that?
Or
Lydia, I think what it came down to is the word
Corrected.
follow. She didn't mean that RTSD should do exactly what Garnet Valley is doing. She meant to monitor, so like a different
Right.
interpretation of
Right.
follow.
Yeah.
Learn
Yeah.
from it.
Okay,
So maybe you just change the
Yeah.
word follow to monitor.
okay, perfect.
Although you could use follow.
Change the word from follow to monitor, and then are the minutes good?
Good with me.
Committee members? Okay, you get that? All right, moving on. That brings us to our first agenda item, which is the Radnor Middle School
We're going to do the board
program.
action items first, if that's okay with you.
That's fine with me.
Okay, so board action items, and I'll clarify a couple of the questions. So we have Radnor High School clubs and Radnor Middle School clubs. You had a list to review. These are recurring clubs that occurred last year and are occurring again this year with the new club sponsors. This is the same process we used last year. They submit a master list to us, and we approve them, and then the business office adds them to our insurance policy and whatnot. And then the other piece that we would like to move to the full agenda is overnight trips. This specific list of overnight trips that comes to us each September, these are anticipated trips for sports teams that we think may go, well, we hope they all go to playoffs, but that we think will go to playoffs. And what happens is when the playoffs occur and we win, we have very little notice that students are leaving on Friday to go to Orlando or whatever it is. So we adopted a policy a couple years ago where we approve these now, and some of the pieces are estimated. The date may wiggle a day here or there, but the substance of the trip is there. There is no difference between whether or not Mr. Bechtold has said to us, it's a district contribution or a district cost. They're just being submitted by different coaches, and some of them refer to it as a contribution. But I will watch that in the future to make sure that that's consistent. All right, so if you could move those to the full board agenda, that would be great.
Okay, committee, or everyone
While we're
okay with that?
clarifying, the van and the bus, are they ours? Is it why we're not paying money for them? Correct?
Yes, well, I mean, they cost us money, but yes.
No, I mean the van. Like, for instance, the van. Is that our van and one of our teachers are driving it?
Yes,
Great.
yes.
That's why we're not renting a bus.
We're not hiring the service. I mean, obviously, there's a cost associated.
Right, oh,
because
yeah,
we
yeah,
own the
yeah.
van, but
Gotcha.
yes, we'll buy the gas.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
those types of
all.
things. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
All right,
All right.
okay?
Yeah, do you want to go back to the middle school?
Yes, please.
Program evaluation, recommendations, and goals.
Okay, so our next agenda item is going to be the middle school program evaluation. Tonight, our focus is going to be around the individual goals. We have specific teachers and administrators who are going to present on each of the goals, and we're going to call them up individually to talk about those things. We do have a PowerPoint that's going to guide the conversation. It has a little bit of information on it, but I would suggest to you that as you listen to their presentation tonight, that taking out the 3-year middle school goal document, the Word document. It's also in the packets that are on the counter. Following along with this will help you to take a look and make some notes around some of the specifics they're going to be sharing. The other thing I wanted to talk about is last year, we did part of this presentation in the spring, and today we're here to talk more specifically about each of the goals and the timelines. But many of the things you're going to hear about today have already begun to take shape in the middle school. We have already begun some of the professional development, some of the planning, some of the action items are in place for the start of school. So even though you'll see that the goals are structured over a 3-year time period, many of these things have already begun, and you're going to hear some samples of those types of things today. So I'd like to start, we're just going to call them up in small groups because we have quite a large group here today, but I'm going to call up the folks who are going to talk about Goal 1A first. And Chuck, yeah.
Let me just ask you a quick question, and that is about the rigor. So it's not a grade.
It's not a spelling test where you would earn 100.
Right, okay.
No.
So if we can explain that before we get started, so there's not that much of angst out here.
Okay, so when we used an external observers to evaluate those 4 components that came up throughout the study, there was a very extensive rubric that was developed that set a very, very high standard for rigor, differentiation, student engagement, and standards alignment. So our goal was to get a baseline based on how our day-to-day instruction compares to the rigor outlined in that rubric. So it's basically a starting point. So we're going to look at how things looked like through that 3-day snapshot versus how they will look a year from now, or 6 months from now, or 2 years from now as a point of reference.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Can I just get one clarification too? And I apologize, I didn't have a chance to call you in advance and ask some of these questions. I know one of the pieces is going to be we have follow-up review over the next couple of years. Do we intend to engage the CCIU to come back, since they set the, kind of our initial scores, to help us evaluate whether we're meeting better standards?
We are using their walkthrough as a baseline, because that is the data that we collected. But we're also working with a group over at the middle school, TLS, who is going to be in and out of the classrooms working with some coaching with our teachers. So it's possible we may either partner that or eventually substitute that with those folks, because the rubric that they're using is more specific to the specific type of professional development we're doing with the teachers. So yes, it is possible we can have them back as a measure. But it's also possible we will collect some intermediary data collections in between that'll help us to identify the specific things that we're working on along the way, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I've just put a quick introduction up here. One of the things I want to remind everyone is, when we first entered on this goal for the middle school, one of the things we applauded the middle school was for being so brave as to come forward and open their doors and allow so many people like the CCIU and outside observers and parents and former students to weigh in on what their middle school experience was like. So, we hear every November from the middle school at their data presentation, the fabulous results that they get, the high achievement that comes out of our schools. And I think sometimes when we get feedback is hard, positive, negative, sometimes it's a struggle to process that information. So I really have to thank the folks that are coming forward today that devoted time this summer to help us develop goals and action plans to move into that cycle of continuous improvement. So with that, I'll ask our first group to introduce themselves, and then we'll talk about the first goal.
Hi, I'm Tom Hagan. I'm the middle school Latin teacher and world language department chair.
Hi, I'm Nicole Kindred. I teach 8th grade mathematics.
Hello, I'm Abby Daniels. I'm the instructional coach at the middle school.
And Ryan Bruderbaugh, assistant principal at the middle school, and also working with Goal 1B and 1C.
Yeah, I'm going to give them mine.
Okay, so I have goal 1A, and that one says all Radnor Middle School curriculum documents will include clearly articulated learning objectives that are built upon the primary targeted standards and challenge students of all levels. So the team that I worked with over the summer, we really looked at and sorted through all the data that was collected, but some of our primary kind of pieces of data that we looked at were really the review of our current curriculum. And sometimes there was an over-alignment of standards, meaning that kind of any standard that was touched on within that unit of study or chapter of study was put into the curriculum documents. However, that might not be the primary standard that is tested maybe at the end of that unit. So just to give you an example, just something basic in math. In your 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, order of operations is something that is touched on in many of the chapters. However, it's not always the targeted standard or the primary standard of that lesson. So if I'm solving equations, I still need to use the order of operations, but that's not the tested content. So we're looking to possibly take out those not primary tested standards. So what they mean by the over-alignment is everything was put in, but is every single standard the one that should be primarily tested. Something else was the teacher feedback when teacher groups were met with, that we'd really like to look and align the curriculum cross-curricularly so that teachers have the opportunity to work together to create project-based assessments that would involve and flow in, a correct pacing that would make sense. And then making sure that our curriculum stood up to the rigor and the differentiation that was received through various parent groups, student groups, and teacher groups. So that was kind of the baseline data that our group looked at. So then we thought, okay, well, what do we want our curriculum to look like? So we said, okay, we really, really need to look through the standards and what are the primary standards within the different grades that need to be targeted at that chapter, that unit. And then from there we said, okay, what do we want our learning objectives to be, or our learning standards? What do we want our students to achieve? So we thought that should be added to the curriculum if it was not already there. And then looking at the alignment, not just at the middle school, but K to 12 in terms of vocabulary. So making sure the vocabulary is consistent from elementary to middle to high. Looking at the pacing guides to make sure the pacing guides have an opportunity for cross-curricular development, if that exists. Your formative and summative assessments. And then finally the differentiation in order to add appropriate rigor to each child's level. So that was what we wanted to do in terms of our action steps. And then when we're measuring it, really looking that our curriculum has made those changes. In terms of a timeline, each subject area is kind of at a different spot in terms of curriculum development. Some have just been recently rewritten, so may just need tweaks to them. So over the next 3 years, just looking at each content area differently and making it more fluid to what that content area needs in terms of making sure that all those pieces are in there.
I am presenting Goal 1B, which is very similar to Goal 1A. It is the instruction goal. We are engaging students in an instructional program that includes rigor, high expectations, and differentiation. I think a key way to think of the difference between the two is when we think of curriculum, we're thinking of the actual documents. When we're thinking about instruction, it's the delivery of that curriculum, and it is what is very much involving and engaging the students. So first, the findings that we used to determine our goals here were again based on the parent and teacher focus group responses and also the walkthroughs that occurred last spring from the CCIU. Our action steps for the instructional programming begins with coming up with that unified vision of rigor, really defining what that looks like for all students and making sure that everyone has a unified understanding of what that means. We're then going to provide, and this is already in the works, the professional development and collaboration for teachers on how to include differentiated instruction within their classrooms, leading to also an exemplar lesson framework. So what an exemplar lesson might look like. Some frameworks means it's not all teachers have to do that exact lesson, but these are some of the key components of an exceptional lesson. We will also engage teachers in peer observation and lesson study. They'll then be able to create lessons with their counterparts, and lastly, develop a system of reflection for the students and teachers that may occur, at the end of units, at the end of year, to determine the effectiveness of those lessons. The measures for success would come from looking at those curriculum documents. Hopefully, after time, we can add these lessons, the exemplar framework, to our curriculum documents. The teachers will have completed the lesson study tiers, which would be different levels of expectation for what we want teachers to exemplify in their lessons throughout the years. And then maybe parent-teacher feedback again over time. The timeline for the instructional goal would be first to identify that vision of rigor. This would all be within this first year before the summer of 2019. Establish the lesson study tiers, the expectations, what they might look like, and how they might be focused on differentiation. There are 3 cohorts of teachers that are engaging with the differentiated instruction professional development with Dr. Pete Grandy. So the cohorts will have all been introduced in the first year, but they will not all be completed within the first year. It's a 3-year system. and then that framework for the exemplar lessons. After the first year, teachers can continue to work through those study tiers and then come up with a system for reflection. After they have the first year under their belts, look back to see how do we determine whether or not these are exemplar lessons. And that's going to vary depending on the grade level and the subject area. And by the third year, we're looking to maybe reissue that survey to get some parent, student, and teacher feedback. All of the curricular areas will have some idea of what a differentiated exemplar lesson will look like in their subject area, and it will be in their curriculum, and the teachers will have gone through the lesson study tiers.
And as Mrs. Daniels said, the focus really is academic excellence, that, we're fortunate to have so many invested stakeholders in the room tonight that participated in the study. And what many of the local districts are doing, one of the companies we're pairing with, the TLS, or Teaching, Learning, Succeeding, with Peak Randy, they're working with Wallingford, Swarthmore, Wissahickon, Springford, Springfield. Their list is pretty lengthy. So again, with the 3 cohorts, it really has experts that are coming in to work with their cohorts. So there's 2 coaches that have already started back in August that have spent almost a full day of in-service just working with them, showing them how to differentiate. I mean, if you ask different folks what is differentiation, what does it look like, you'll probably get a lot of different answers. Reality is there's 22, 23 students in the class. They're different learners. They have different learning preferences. They have different background knowledge and experiences. And it just, having these experts come in and provide support throughout the entire year, and having the chance to collaborate with your peers, to observe through the learning walks, and also just to get feedback, from the organization, not so much from the supervision standpoint, but just for continuous improvement. And that's really what we're trying to do, is improve Radnor Middle School. As Dr. McQuiggan said, we're a great public school, but how can we improve and how we get better? So the feedback, as Mrs. Daniels mentioned, with the parents, the students, peers, colleagues, will continue to just, are we meeting the goals? Are we reaching the students? Are we teaching the students? And, this is our plan moving forward for the next, 3 years to meet Goal 1B.
And for Goal 1C, can you guys hear me? I'm new to all this. For Goal 1C, that is, all students are offered a diverse and comprehensive OnCore experience that includes rigorous expectations and provides a clear path for in-depth study and choice. I know most of you guys probably know this. OnCore refers to sometimes we're specials, electives, your music, art, world language, all of those sorts of classes boil down into that. This goal is divided kind of into 2 different parts. There's a part about rigor, and then there's a part about student choice. And I'll do the rigor first. There were some responses in the study that said that the OnCore classes in the middle school didn't always prepare them for what was expected of students in the high school. So one of the things that we would like to do to help kind of remedy that is, first and foremost, reestablish some vertical team activities. We, as some of our departments, now, for instance, the world language one, we hadn't met officially as a vertical team in a couple of years. Now, that's not to say that, did all the Latin teachers not sit around in a room and talk to each other? Well, yes, of course. But, we would have to work on curriculum documents or common assessments, and we never got a chance to sit down and just sort of say, hey, what are you guys doing? What can I do better? What is something I can do better to prepare my students for the future and things like that? So that's first and foremost, though, something we can do right away is start to have more of those vertical team meetings and vertical interactions. Along with that, in terms of the rigor, we also, I'm sorry, that's it for rigor. In terms of student choice, we are looking at sometimes in the study, students would say that there weren't choices in electives that they wanted, that reflected their interests. And it can be tough because one of the challenges that we have as OnCores is we want to give the students a well-rounded education. A lot of times, our mission is from school to the world, preparing the hearts, minds, spirits of all students. And a lot of times our classes are where the kids who sometimes fall through the cracks in other subjects find that. They find that area. Pardon me. And so we want to try to make sure that we hit more of those interests and possibly offer them some more choice in terms of what they can choose. Because right now, when students come to middle school, in 6th grade, all of their classes are picked for them. They go through all the encores, they do the world language exploratory rotation, and the one choice that they make in the end of 6th grade is they pick their language. And they take that every other day for the whole year in 7th grade and every day for the whole year in 8th grade. And the only other choice they get is going from 7th grade into 8th grade, where they can pick 2 electives, but the world language and the health and phys ed classes take up the other slots that they would have for that sort of thing. So we want to see, by not only making sure that we are still offering a comprehensive, education for these students in all the elective subjects, we also want to make sure that these students can, if possible, get more choice to kind of take some pathways. If they're interested really in, STEM, is that something that they can dive into through electives, through the tech ed classes? Or for someone like me, like the Latin teacher, maybe they don't want to necessarily learn the language, but maybe I can offer something like a mythology course, talk about, Roman history, Roman mythology, get kids excited that way. And I think that's let me just double check. I went on a little bit of a roll. So that was the one other thing I wanted to mention that I really like in terms of our action steps is that we want to see what other middle schools are doing. What is it that, we're the number 2 middle school, what's the number 1 middle school doing? What are other middle schools in the area doing? What are they offering? What are things that maybe we could change, whether by offering classes or within our curriculum, to make our students more aligned in terms of their choices? So what we plan on doing is we also plan on doing a survey of our students to get their interests, to figure out. That was the one thing that was tough about this group, is we didn't have as much baseline data. We heard that, students said that sometimes their interests weren't being heard in the classes. So we want to craft a survey that says, okay, well, what are your interests? And are they things that we can bring into our curriculum, bring into our classes? So we want to do that kind of every year here. And what we want to do in terms of measures of success, in terms of choice, is to, as we administer that survey, we want to make sure that, or not make sure, but we want to see the things that students are interested in, are they more and more aligning with what we are offering and what we are teaching? And then in terms of the rigor, our measure of success would be more that the vertical teams kind of look at our curriculum, are the flow of kids from middle school to high school, and to see, is that something that we can address and what can we work on there? I don't know if
Thank you, Mr. Hagan. And just to add a few more details, is that, some of the work's already begun. Last year, the Spanish teachers are number 1 world language as far as student choice. They decided to move to the same common textbook. So the students would have the same experience in 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade with Senderos. And throughout the summer, both the middle school and high school Spanish teachers that teach those courses met several times just to plan to get more calibration when what's happening in the middle school and what's occurring in the high school. And some of that was already in the works before the program study even begun. And the timing of this is kind of unique because as we all know that coming in the fall, the Future Ready Index comes out. And part of that, one of the big parts of it is the college and career readiness, often how we call it 339. Are we preparing our students for beyond high school, post-secondary endeavors? And so we're starting to see a lot of overlap between, goal number 3, or I should say 1C, with choice, with passions, with pursuing your interests. And we're having different guest speakers come in, like through career cafes, to expose our students to the careers that are out there. It's not just going to a liberal arts 4-year college and having a degree. So we're just trying to tie that into, like, what's the connection between your middle school OnCore or electives and what you're taking in high school and beyond. So we're trying to make more pathways. And that really does kind of like roll down to goal 1B with choice, with having a voice in what you're learning in the classroom, not just going from chapter 2 to 3, because 3 comes after 2 and it's before 4, but just really make it more personalized for the students. So again, like as Mrs. Kindred said, like that goal 1 is the foundation with the curriculum documents, and the instruction comes next, and just having the kids have a voice within the school day. And really, you get 3 choices currently as it stands. So we're trying to find ways to bring in some new electives, because after all, elective is choice, right? You have a say in what they're learning, and just finding ways to differentiate in the classroom to meet their current learning needs. So we as we spend the summer as a program review committee, we're seeing all these overlaps, and the timing is great with the change of how the state looks at public schools, and are we meeting the needs of our students? And that's across the Commonwealth. So this is kind of occurring at the opportune time as I see it. So that does complete the first 3 goals, 1, 1A, 1B, and 1C. And we're going to pass the torch a
wanna
little
switch
bit
places with
to
the other
1C and 1D. Yeah,
You want to do it now,
we're
or you want
here.
to do it at the end?
Yeah.
Lydia?
Okay.
Would you like to ask questions now, or would you like to wait until the end?
So we aren't pulling them.
Yeah, of this
Yeah,
particular crew? Yeah, let's do
So
that. Are
curriculum,
you-
instruction, and OnCore.
Yeah, yes. So basically goals 1A, B, and C.
I have two quick questions, that's it. Okay. So, I'll repeat my thank you many times, but thank you for all the work. I've heard you say it. I've thought it the entire time that it existed. If one of the things that comes out of this is we get rid of the word encore, we spend our time explaining, well, encores are electives. Well, then let's just call them electives. That's what they are. That's a little bugaboo for me. And I noticed you all had to keep explaining that's what, encore is. Well, let's just call it what it is. One. The other thing is actually more a question for Mr. Hagan in the sense of in electives, we are more likely to see kids of different abilities.
Absolutely.
I heard us talk a lot about rigor, and I guess my only comment is bringing in that, is there a plan to bring in that differentiation, professional development to the elective teachers as well? I heard you speak about rigor, but in fact, in that classroom, that's where you might have some of your greatest need for differentiation with regard to
Absolutely.
experience and abilities and interests. So you don't have to answer. I'm just saying, I hope that some of that differentiation PD comes for electives as well.
And that's a misconception that, Encore, it's, there shouldn't be homework or it's easy, and that's, all classes are challenging. Sure. We're challenging all learners at their present levels of education. And in this first cohort that's going through the Teaching, Learning, Succeeding, it's a mix of teachers from core, encore, different grade levels. So
I was going to say, I know of just
phys ed and
personally
health
at least
teacher in there.
one,
We
yeah.
have world language, I believe, one world language.
Yeah, I think so. And,
Gail Furman, Tech Ed. So we try to pull the first 15 or so. It has to be small groups. So we have 3 cohorts. So, we're trying to pull a variety of folks in so they can share with their departments. And also the kids are experiencing something similar, a similar level of instruction and challenge in all classes, whether you're in 6th or 8th grade, it's a science class or a health class that, they're using these best practices. And that's part of the goal, is to challenge students in all subjects and all classes.
I guess I was speaking more to the skill of differentiation in a classroom where you might have
Absolutely.
a wider range of abilities because electives bring all sorts of kids together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I look just in my classroom. I have a wide range of students from, students who might perform a little bit lower on the standardized test to kids who are gifted and who are asking me, philosophical questions about the constructions of Latin. And so, absolutely, I'm looking forward to that, looking forward to bringing that in and being able to better serve, not just my kids at the lower and upper ends, but also in the middle, to really hone my craft. And I think that would be across the Encore, to really make sure that, we get this differentiated training too, and to make sure that we can use it as well. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have questions?
I did, but I didn't know if we were going to start down and work over, so I didn't know if Julie had questions.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Chuck,
Did you? Chuck? Go ahead, Sarah.
I want to reiterate what I know has been said, and I hope everyone here hears it tonight. Reviews like this, especially when you have outside reviewers who give what seem like very difficult scores, and getting feedback from students and parents that's not always perfect, is very difficult. And I do really respect that you all took that, put it into public documents, shared it with us, and that you're here as a face to deal with it. So I want you to know I really appreciate the professionalism that comes with dealing with that. It's never easy to take criticism, and it's especially important in this context that we take it and improve. So I really appreciate that you're doing that. I guess one concern, I understood the concept of over-alignment, but I guess I'm not sure, and I guess I'm going to have to trust that you guys are doing it. I'm not sure I really heard how we're going to address the rigor issue, because I think what I read from the student comments, and I have a middle schooler, and I was a student at one point, right, is that we're not looking for more busy work. We want to make sure that they're challenged and really brought to the highest levels that they can achieve. And I know especially within things like world languages, again, where you have kids who are in there because they have to take a world language. And then you have kids who want to travel the world and want that language to take it with them. And it's very hard, I think, for a teacher to deal with that difference. So I want to make sure, maybe it ties to another comment. You had the cohorts issue. Is it every teacher is ever going to serve in a cohort, or you've got 3 and there'll be certain key people who serve in that?
Yeah, just to, thank you again for recognizing the work that so many stakeholders, played a role in this, the teachers, listening to feedback, which is sometimes difficult to hear. And, I think the teachers embraced it, and they want to improve the middle school. They're very proud of their craft, and that's why they spent their summer and so many hours trying to find a way to improve and take this feedback and use it into actionable steps. So to get back to your question about the rigor, a couple years ago, we still are a very high-achieving school district, and sometimes we associate high achievement or high test scores with rigor, or an accelerated class was rigor because it was accelerated, that's by nature. But I think we're looking to grow so much more. So, Mrs. Daniels and I, we both are part of the RMS data team, so that's part of the information. We're constantly assessing where are they at, how much they grow from year to year, from grade to grade, and we really use that data to inform instruction, to guide instruction. So I think we have so many resources with Performance Tracker, during the counterparts. So once every 8 days, the teachers of a common subject will say, 7th grade math, sit down and look at chapter tests with Math in Focus, and they try to calibrate, like, what are the students learning, where are the gaps at, are we challenging them, and are they growing? So, how I see it is just the data component of it, that they're growing, not just achieving, because many of our students are some of the highest achieving in the state, but are we growing our middle, our top, so that's the part of the challenge is that, it's one thing to say we're going to challenge all students, but to actually do it's different. So we have the organization to help. I know our data team's doing a lot of work. Abby's one of our instructional coaches to help to show teachers to model rigor. And do you want to talk about rigor at all within your role as an instructional coach?
I would just say about the word rigor itself, it's different for every person. Nicole spoke about a math problem, and that was really rigorous for me. I couldn't follow. But for Nicole, that would not be rigorous. So when we use the term rigor, and I think we're talking about how are we challenging learners, that's not going to look the same for every student. So that's why we built that in as one of the action steps for Goal 1A and B, is to define what does rigor look like for every student. We're not looking to create curriculum that is so rigorous that some of our learners, will never reach the achievement that we want them to. Yes, we want everyone to be challenged. So what would that look like in each class? How is that going to look different for kids depending on, whether they're achieving high or low, in different grades, different subject areas, it's all going to look different. So we need to create a framework for that, for what that looks like, so that everybody knows, okay, this is rigorous.
Well, can I follow up? Because that's an excellent question, because rigor is something that if you ask people to define it, it's very difficult to define. But maybe, and I'll put you on the spot because you look as if you're on the ball here. Can you? I'm a Latin student. I'm a very low-level Latin student, and then Lydia is a high-level Latin student. So, can you give a little bit of an example of something that you're going to provide to both of us, rigorous, in your classroom, because you're differentiating between the two of us?
So, obviously, it would depend on every situation. But so, for instance, something I'll actually be teaching my 8th graders next week, direct objects in Latin. Whenever there's a noun that receives an action in a sentence, it's the direct object. Now, later we'll call that the accusative case, but we don't get fancy to start. What I would tell to the lower end student is I would say, just look for ends. And when we translate, look for words that end in M. Because, direct objects in the singular typically end with M. And so that's what I would say to you. And as we translate, I might say, what did you spot? How are they interacting with the verbs? Now, for the higher performing student, I might go a step further and go, what do you notice about the letter before the M? Because that's telling us another category. That's telling us, is the noun masculine, feminine, neuter? It's telling us, things like, could there be an adjective that goes with it? And so that's the way that I would kind of say it. With my lower performing students, I might say, for them, rigor might be, do they get the basics? And do I know that I can move on knowing that they can get that and that we'll build on that? And then for my higher ones, it's more, and I know I kind of said it jokingly, but can I discuss more the kind of philosophy behind it? And have a chance to say, later we're going to add prepositions, and you're going to see that more that motion, more that thing, that the accusative case, the direct objects, also is going to add some prepositions. So to be able to kind of go in both, it's tough in one class, but, it's something that, I strive to do every day.
Yeah, because what would be rigorous, the beginning would be rigorous for
Exactly.
me, and what you're teaching her is rigorous for her. So
Yeah.
you've differentiated that. I thank you very much. It was a great
my
example.
pleasure.
And I can just even add, rigor could also just be the types of questions that the teacher is asking the students, and you can differentiate just by asking questions. So for example, if we're working in fractions, I've got half a glass of water, and I could go around the room and I could say, okay, if I add a quarter, so if you have a lower level math student, if I have a quarter of a glass of water, can I add it to that half a glass? Will it overflow? And then somebody who is maybe higher level, you can give them, I have 3/8, or I have 5/7, I have 6/7 of a glass of water. So you can start changing the denominator based on the level that they're at. And then for that really high achieving student, you could say, okay, well, is it going to overflow? If it's going to overflow, how much is it going to overflow? So you can really hone in on that rigor strictly through questioning. And that formative assessment, you know which students you can ask which questions. So I think it could be something simple in terms of questioning, even to get across to that rigor.
Along the lines of rigor, it seems to me that the CCIU must have metrics for what rigor is, because it gave a score. So I guess my question is, what did the CCIU use to determine a score for rigor? And are those metrics something that the middle school, if it's going to have another walkthrough by the CCIU at some point in time, wants to align itself with so that the score goes up?
And I will say, I'll counter that by saying, do you want to just do it because your score is going to go up? Because we've just been saying that the score has meaning, but it's not the end-all, be-all. So maybe before we do that, we should make sure that that's the end point that we're going for.
Well, I guess prior to that, my question is, though, one thing that I had trouble discovering in the documents was, what did the CCIU mean by rigor? I mean, that to me is, if that score is going to be dismissed out of hand, fine, then I guess that's not important. But if it's something that is going to be one of the measures of this, factors in this review, my question is, what did that mean? What did they look at to come up with that score? Is that something that the study wants to give weight to? And if it does, maybe it's that definition of rigor that should play some role in moving the ball forward for the next time this review occurs.
The CCIU had a rubric that they used for the walkthroughs, and I don't know if we have copies of that. Okay, so the rubric, the teachers were not aware of. They had not seen the rubric prior to being observed, so they didn't necessarily know what the observer was looking for. And I think that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it. I think it's definitely important as we define rigor that we consider what they were looking at, but not necessarily use what they identified rigor as solely for Radnor.
And can I add to that? And I think, it's also important that, if the CCIU does come back, that they actually spend, enough time in our rooms to really see what is the rigor. If they're just doing a quick walkthrough and it's 5 minutes, how much are you really going to see in 5 minutes time? So some rooms they spent a lot of time in, some rooms it was a quick walkthrough and a walk out. So I think that's also important to take in, that sometimes there wasn't a true 20-minute time period that these CCIU observers were in our rooms to get a clear view of what we do. So thank you for asking that.
So just as a it kind of takes into account, Julia, what you just said about it's not, I don't think Amy meant to say it's about getting the score up. And I know that that's not what any of this is really about. This is really just about what do our kids need and you know. But it does raise the interesting thing. It's important that you, administrators and teachers, have a common understanding of what you mean by rigor, and that score from the CCIU was sobering, I would say, but it was a point in time, and it doesn't have reference until you go do the work that you're intending to do, and we go back at another point in time and say, was there an improvement? And I wouldn't say an improvement, i.e. the score goes up. I think that the improvement is going to come in the anecdotal, you know, comments from parents and students and teachers' experiences of this whole thing. But, you know, it's good, really great point, Amy, you know, having that you all have a common understanding of what rigor means, at least in that particular rubric, will give context for the next time it's evaluated. You know, we looked at the PSSA scores. They dropped precipitously in 1 year. They dropped precipitously in 1 year across the state, across independent schools, and Radnor. I'm going to say probably the tests changed. Something changed because it didn't happen that magically. Radnor and the suburban schools and the state had a precipitous drop. I think it was 2015. The first thing I saw when I saw that was like, well, they must have done something different that year. And then the scores went back up. And, you know, it's trends and context. It's not just about that score. So, you know, you guys have that information of, quote, rigor, which is great.
You have to move along. I mean, this is very nice.
Yeah, let's make sure we give our
Well,
other
I mean,
teachers-
just to maybe sum up some of the thoughts people are saying, I think with regard to rigor, it's not that we want a score just to move up. I think with all this data, you want to take trends that you see throughout a lot of different points in it. And I do think that came up in a lot of different aspects of the things that we looked at. Student comments, parent comments, and the CCIU and other things that indicated, yeah, this is maybe something we want to focus on and look at. So I'm just going to add that piece.
Thank you. So thank you very much. And we'll invite our next two groups up so we can keep moving.
Thanks. Now I'm really in trouble.
I know we definitely sat wrong.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, you want to introduce yourselves and then we'll jump right in.
Is this on?
It's off now.
No, I like it better that when it's off. Okay, I'm Terry Canny. I'm a teacher at the middle school.
Jen Campus, 7th grade language arts teacher.
Esther Purnell, principal.
Doug Kent, assistant principal.
All right, and we're here to talk about the goals that are part of organization, culture, and climate. You know, we just heard a lot about instruction and curriculum and so forth. Clearly, those are important, but if you don't have a culture and climate that works, a lot of those things get lost. And our first aspect of culture and climate we're looking at is communication. The feedback we got, a finding that we presented back in the spring, suggested that while we have many wonderful forms of communication, some of them aren't being used, some of them are being overused. It's not clear as to which ones are used when and by whom, right? So we got some feedback from parents saying they had trouble finding things like clubs. One teacher did this with homework on Schoology and another person put it there on Schoology, right? And there was some lack of maybe consistency in terms of how we use our forms of communication. So the first thing we wanted to do was just look at what forms we use and see what was the best way to use them and who was utilizing the different forms. You might have heard on the technology study, one of the things we're already doing is Schoology really student, teacher, staff, district is using OneDrive, right? So we're beginning to delineate where we're communicating and with whom. Part of that stems from that idea from parents saying we need an easier way to find out about sports cancellations or practices and who's using Remind Me and who's not. So one of our studies or one of the things we've looked at currently and are looking at throughout the year is when do we use the forms of communication and what's the best way. So Schoology for parents, teachers have gone through some Schoology training here at our beginning week of school as to how we're going to post things, where we're going to post things, so it's going to look the same for all teachers. We've sent out emails to parents saying, here's your Schoology code number, or please just ask to join that, so we get parents involved. We'll use Schoology metrics to see how many visits we're getting on those pages, who's used them, how often do students log on to them, how often do parents log on to them, and then use that to kind of move forward as to whether we're going to continue with that kind of Schoology as the best place for those things to happen. That's kind of school-home communication, school-school communication. There was a feeling that we weren't maximizing our faculty meeting times because we were using them kind of as a laundry list, this kind of reading off. So we're hopefully starting kind of like what you guys have, a consent agenda, where administration will send out those items that are kind of more everyday business items to us prior to a faculty meeting. If there's questions about those, we'll try to get them to them prior to the meeting, so we're not using that valuable meeting time just to go over when the assembly is going to be 2 weeks from now. We're also looking at establishing better, the OneDrive will help us with some of the things that were mentioned in terms of curriculum. You have a long-term sub come in, where do they go? We can have that on OneDrive. As long as they have access to OneDrive, they'll be able to access the curriculum, not wondering is it on the P drive, the H drive, wherever it might be. So we're hoping that things like OneDrive and OneNotebook will help streamline some of those things and also help us communicate better from grade level to grade level, because we'll have, like right now there's an English language arts, there's a science, there's a social studies kind of notebook that we put our different agendas in and different things that happen during counterparts. That's where all that will be gathered so anybody can see it, as well as administration. So if they can't make a counterpart meeting, which is quite possible because there might be an IEP or there might be an emergency, they can go back and look and see what was discussed in terms of curricular initiatives during our counterpart meetings. So we're hoping that that will help streamline those miscommunications as well. Finally, one of the things that came from the teachers was they felt that sometimes parents knew an announcement about something that was happening in the school before the teacher knew, and we might have found out from parents, like, oh, what, and so we're really working to make sure that whatever's communicated home to parents is received by teachers prior to parents getting that as well, to make it more comfortable for everybody. And I spoke quickly, but
no, it's great.
Okay, all right.
Jen Campus again. I was tasked with the last piece of the organizational culture and climate. And in this piece, we were looking at teachers and teacher involvement in the decision making that occurs within our building and as a district level. So first and foremost, we have to remember the fact that the number one thing that was mentioned as a strength were the teachers, in fact. So we have to use our teachers to be our voices and to share input that is working and not working within the building. If you'll see within the packet, the biggest portion of the teacher involvement was within those teacher focus groups. We used the teacher focus groups this year to provide a model for how we're going to organize ongoing meetings, as far as filtering information, sharing it out, being visible, and making clear to our staff what is happening. And the more visibility and trust that we form within our entire group is only going to improve all these other initiatives that we're doing. This piece, again, as we were saying before, one of the hardest parts is creating a baseline. So we're going to work on coming up with a survey that will accurately work on organizational culture and climate to try to figure out, that's such a big, hefty topic, what of those areas really do need to be improved upon. And that survey will hopefully create a baseline to give us some target areas to work on past that area. We're going to use this to make sure that we have greater representation of staff. What we found was, Terry Candy's name on everything, no. What we found was, that the same people were generously volunteering their time to be on committees, and we were perhaps missing focus groups. So we wanted to make sure that we had representation from all areas so that not one voice was missed or not represented in a group. So those are going to be the areas that we're moving toward to make sure that transparency, visibility, and a mutual trust and respect is there to make decisions within our building that are best for our students.
So good evening. To just wrap up what Terry and Jen have said, is taking ownership, Doug, Ryan, and I, for the administrative pieces that we needed to correct. And so part of that was we usually survey our staff and ask them, you know, what is working, what isn't working. And you're right, it is hard to swallow that information. This year we've selected 3 questions, which our staff, we're giving it an opportunity to respond to, and the responses, they're synonymous. The responses are good so far. It's regarding, do you feel that your talents are being used at Radnor Middle School? Do you feel, how can the 3 administrators help you to unleash those talents? And then the last one is there an elephant in the room? And if so, how can we work together to identify, in order to support our students, our staff, and our community? And so those are pretty tough. The responses are coming in, but we will then calibrate that information. Even when we had, on August the 27th, when the information started coming in, we didn't wait until now. I'm talking about 3 administrators to see how can we improve what we're doing in the building to work towards improving the culture and climate. So we've had an opportunity to look at this for several months, but working with our staff, I think, has been so beneficial. I feel like that our conversations are more open. I feel like that there's more relaxation. We're able to have conversations where what the staff have been saying to us, we have to really humble ourselves and hear it and use that in a valuable way to move our building forward. So even when our first faculty meeting, as Jen was even talking about, this was August the 27th, we had our committees, and we'd use the regular chart paper, the committees that we typically have that run within the building each year. And then the staff had asked, because we had introduced it a little bit earlier, and there are other committees, like we have the mini-thon that had come along, there's work that the staff are doing already. And I was so happy to see so many individuals that had already signed up. We had to actually stop some people because we're saying we want 8 to 10 in each of the committees so that we can have that variety. So there are about 13 committees that we're working with the staff. We already have our framework that we're working with so that the information, like what Terry is saying, we're using so that there's one place so that we know what all the committees are doing. Again, trying to take that information and then roll it back out so that our staff do see that we do believe in them. We need their voices. We need what they're sharing with us so that we can work more harmoniously to make the culture and the climate of our building more beneficial, because in the long run, who's going to benefit? The students are. That may be it. We tried it also with our grade level. I told them that that was a mad rush trying to get that agenda ready so that they could see it in advance. I promised them, I said, I can give you 24 hours, but anything prior to that, I can't promise you. But we tried it for our grade level meetings. We even coordinated them so that our OnCore meetings and our grade level meetings, which occur once a month, are happening on the same day. Because something as small as 6th grade meeting in the morning, 8th grade meeting in the afternoon, and maybe 7th grade meeting 2 days later, they're not getting the information at the same time. So having it on that same day, all 4 major groups getting that information, even something like that, makes it helpful and will prevent this whisper down the lane that our staff says occurs sometimes. That's it in a nutshell, and I feel like we're well on our way.
Great. Do you want to move on to the other action items? Sure. Oh, that's you, Doug, right? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to thank all of our teachers and our staff for really embracing this process. As has been repeated many times, this can be a daunting task, but I think really one thing this has done is further unify us as Radnor Middle School and making sure that we all are singularly focused on students all the time. So this, I think, has been a great exercise for us, and I think, you know, any school could benefit from this type of review, really looking at everything that we do. Some other things that did come about through the study, whether it be through student comment, parent comment, staff comment, that we either are already moving and addressing or will be addressing moving into next school year are as follows. First, looking at a criteria for evaluating modifications to the instructional day. So we all know at the middle school that social emotional learning is critical, and making sure that what we do is age appropriate for our students. When we're having an assembly, making sure that it is either related directly to curricular areas and or appropriate social emotional learning for our students. Working with our PTO, this year we asked to specifically only have 4 assemblies, 1 per quarter, where in the past that might have been more assemblies. So trying to regain some instructional time that way, and really being cognizant of things that may take away from class time, but with the understanding there are some things that are extremely valuable that are taken away from class time, whether it be Raider Day, whether it be our web program where everyone belongs, really building those social emotional skills and connections. The most important thing is the relationships. Without the relationships between the staff, between the students, everything else really doesn't matter. And that's how crucial the relationships are. If we don't have the relationships, we can have the best curriculum in the world, and it's really not going to fully reach the students. So we understand how crucial the social emotional part is. Another area, looking at their current bell schedule in which we run under, and seeing that is there another way that we can work within that bell schedule to further maximize time, and working with our staff, and you can see a date on that of November of this year. So working with our staff, looking at a possibility, and we have a committee for that as well, working with all of our staff to see is what we currently have the best, or is there something else that would be more beneficial to students and staff. Looking at our integrated lottery system, this work has already begun. Meetings have already started, working with all of our integrated teams in saying, let's look at what we currently do as far as a lottery. Is there a better way that we can do it? Looking at the history of the lottery, you know, and utilizing the expertise in the room, folks who have been involved in those programs for a long time, and saying, well, this is why we currently do it, and this is why we got to this point, and really fully investigating, are there things that need to be changed? There may be, there may not be. And finally, opening access to accelerated courses in ELA, social studies, and science. This is something that we frequently hear from parents, that, you know, if a student is at the high school, oftentimes they may be able to waive into a course, but may not have that same leeway at the middle school. So moving towards the 2019-2020 school year, working with our staff and putting a process in place where students would have greater access, greater opportunity to some of these accelerated courses that we have in place. Thank you.
And the last piece we wanted to mention was the piece about cross-district connections. So one of the things, you know, as we've entered into these different studies across the district around technology and soon to be around wellness and whatnot, is we're really looking to see how these initiatives overlap with each other. So there were some things that came up in the study that we knew needed to address, but we also knew there were things that came up that we were already addressing. So even though the topic of, for instance, writing came up throughout the middle school study, we already have an initiative around writing that we put in place in relationship to our language arts audit that we did a couple of years ago. So we just wanted to highlight that piece as something that's going to work in response to the middle school study, but it also was in response to our language arts audit that we did a couple of years ago. Terry mentioned a little bit about the technology study. Through that, we also heard the common threads about communication and not using a lot of different types of communication. We've just adopted an AR for communication that focuses on our 5 specific communication pieces that we're using, and those pieces tie into some of the feedback from the middle school study. And the last piece is the calendar committee we're going to be running this year. You saw in some of the data we looked at that our students may not be getting as many face-to-face days as other students are in the classroom, even though our year may be just as long. Our students may not be getting as many minutes or those types of things based on the way we plan our school calendar. So we have a school calendar committee that's going to be working and actually coming to you next month with Dr. Kent, giving you a little idea of what's happening with that. So I'm really happy the way our initiatives across the district have begun to kind of thread within each other and support each other and work together. So it doesn't feel like we're doing, 50 new things. We're doing 5 new things that all support one another and work us all in the same direction. So I think we have a couple minutes, not very many left. Do you want to have a few more questions?
Are you going to be going into this?
We still have to do goals.
The program review findings, this piece, or?
No, we weren't doing
This
we're
was
only
the piece we
doing
were gonna do tonight.
goals
Okay.
and action steps tonight.
Okay, perfect. I want to turn it over to my board colleagues. Does anyone have questions on the second group of goals that was just presented to us?
I will go ahead. I will say, this is so gratifying because the complaints that you hear while you're here in the district, you captured them all. You got them. You got what I hear anecdotally, some frustrations from parents. You got it all. Thank you. Thank you for your fearlessness. I see. It seems like there were no sacred cows that were avoided. I appreciate it so much, and I think a lot of parents really will resonate with them. So it's exciting to see this going forward. Thank you all so much. One question, I think you said it, but I wasn't clear on it. Yes, Mr. Canny, regarding Schoology, did you say, are you going to have sort of baseline expectations, like for?
Yeah, one of the communications, 2 things. One was we wanted to set up protocol as far as email goes. And let everybody know that, like, how soon would one expect a response from email? Along with that, to kind of ease things, would be Schoology. The way we enter assignments into Schoology, we're all entering them the same way, as an event, or not as an event, but as a an assignment, right? And so they'll show up in the calendar and they'll show up in the course itself. So everybody's assignment should look the same. So if you have a child in my room for math and you have a child in Jen's room for language arts, you're going to look at the same type of situation in terms of the screen will look the same. Hopefully the assignment won't be the same, but the screen will look the same, right?
So one of the things that came out of, in particular, the parent focus groups were the fact that they'd like more consistency with the use of Schoology, with how those assignments are posted so that it's more readily accessible and that it works, especially if you have twins or if you have siblings, and so that piece works together. So we've worked together this year. We've already started to try to align that within the grades and across to make sure that visibly we all look the same and that it makes it more accessible at home.
And with staff, we're looking to see if we can't come up with like a document that said, if I want to do this, like if I want to highlight something that just happened in my classroom, what vehicle do I use? So kind of a frequently asked questions, if you will. If I want to, let people know of an upcoming test, this is the vehicle I should use, as opposed to parents having to try to guess and look at 5 different things.
Okay, anybody else have anything you want to ask at this time?
Just a quick question. It's a clarification on some of the paperwork we have about the writing initiative. It says you're going to start this in the 1920 year, and then the thing that you just had up there, it said 1819.
I know it said 1920, but we already started. The teachers have already had their first day of professional development.
We had our first day.
So that was maybe a typo.
Yeah, it's good news typo.
It's a great news typo. Thank you. Great.
Anybody else?
I have a comment that's actually probably more for leadership than for you guys. And I think this is clearly involved monumental effort by the teachers and the staff and the administration. But I don't want to wait and hear about it again a year from now. I'd like, if possible, to hear more updates as we make progress. I think it's something very important. I think you guys have identified some great areas that you're going to work on and make improvements about. And I think it's important for the curriculum committee, the board, the public, to know that we're making this progress. And I don't think it's something we can wait and hear about once a year. I don't think we need to haul in 15 people from the middle school, on a Tuesday evening. But I think it'd be great to hear feedback as you're making progress, or pitfalls, things that aren't working. And it's okay to admit that, well, we tried this, we listened to the committee of teachers and this is what they wanted, and it turns out that doesn't work, and we're going to go back and do it this way. That's fine. I think it would just be helpful to avoid the whisper down the lane like you're talking about. I think you're going to get people in the community whispering and saying, oh, I heard this or I heard that. And so I think it'd be nice if we could have kind of clear explanations publicly about where we are with things. It'd be helpful.
Are you looking quarterly?
That may be
3 months?
That may be
Or
more.
something like that. I think it would be a great idea. I also enjoy when the teachers come here, because we don't, my children are grown, so I don't get opportunities to interact with teachers as much as I used to. So when we see our professionals that are here, and it gives us a real sense of what's going on, not just the administrators, but the teachers, and I enjoy that, so.
It's his nice way of saying he gets tired of us administrators, I think, but that's right. No. But I would just like to echo so much of what you heard tonight from the board. I can't thank enough not only the whole building, but this group of teachers that worked this summer with the administration that looked at and was willing to really ask some tough questions, was willing to look at and say, we have a really great program. There's so many things to be so proud of at Radnor Middle School, but how do we look at it from continuous improvement? We spoke as a board a year ago about a pressure cooker and trying to pull things out of the pressure cooker, and a teacher reminded me today of that as well, that I talked to the staff about that as well. As we try to take things out of that pressure cooker, how do we talk about things and do it in a way that moves us forward as a district, but to have some of those difficult discussions when we need to do that. And I think our middle school has really been leaders for us in how to do that and coming forward tonight. So I thank you for that.
I want to just make 2 comments sort of to wrap up. I think, first of all, I want to echo the sentiment, just how appreciative we are that you took the time to do this and the willingness to do this and to make improvements. And I think a couple of you echoed this, which is my belief too. We do this because this is the right thing to do for our students. So we're the adults, and so I just want to commend you for acting like the adults and doing what's right for students in the middle school. And I just want to make one more comment that may be missed on the wider audience since the community is watching. We are just talking here about the results of all the work these different teams did to look at the goals for the middle school. I just want to highlight some of the data that went into this that was not presented in this meeting. This was background information that had been gathered through the year, and it is parent surveys, parent focus groups, student focus groups, teacher focus groups, staff interviews. You heard discussion of the CCIU study, so we had an outside organization come in and look at what's going on. The PSSA data results. We also looked at the PSSA results compared to our peer groups, our peer group comparison data. We looked at our PVOS data, which is showing the growth of students. We looked at Keystone exams. We looked at the instructional time, the schedule in the middle school. We looked at professional development. We looked at the Amplify Science curriculum. I mean, there was a lot here, and I'm not sure people fully appreciate how much work everyone did to come to this. So again, it's for the right purpose, and I just want to commend everyone for looking at all those pieces and pulling it together. So,
thank you very much. You want to talk about the goals?
Sure. Thank you all. Thank you. Just looking at the time, the next item on the agenda was to discuss district goals. Board members, you have a copy of that. Those were also posted publicly as well. And it is something that we would be looking for, and I know board members have been, looking at these over the course of the summer, really since the May-June time period. Why don't I just, in the interest of time, if there are questions that board members have, since it will be on our business meeting agenda this month, email me if you have questions or feedback before that meeting, and then we can discuss some more at the business meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everybody's okay with that?
Yes.
All right, thank you. That brings us to new business. Any new business for the good of the group? Okay, and this is our last public comment session. I will invite public comment, but please be mindful that we're already over time for our meeting, and we have a jam-packed agenda tonight because we only have tonight for committee meetings due to the district calendar. Is there any public comment at this time? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.